Welcome to Wisdom for Nonprofits, bringing the best business wisdom to the nonprofit world. Proven leaders share their experience, insights, and best practices. Finally, a podcast for the busy nonprofit professional. And now, your trusted advisor, Bettina Meyer-Flug.
Hello folks, we are here again with another episode of the podcast Wisdom for Nonprofits, and today we're going to talk about lessons learned from Dan Pallota. Dan Pallota is a TED talker, and we're going to talk about his last TED recording. Was amazing. And we have here today Clark Hodge, the executive director of Chase the Music, and he was the one who introduced me to this amazing author. And Dan Pallota wrote two books. One it's called Uncharitable, and the other one is The Charity Case. Those books are amazing. I really recommend you guys to take a look on that. And Clark is going to talk a little bit about his organization, and we're going to start talking about those subjects of the TED Talk. So please tell me a little bit more about yourself.
So I'm a Colorado boy, moved here with my family when I was about 10 years old, and grew up in a household that was always oriented towards public service. My father was on the board of the hospital and built a new hospital in our local town. He was active in a number of community service organizations, and so it was always part of my life growing up. And it was a natural thing as I entered the corporate world to do the same kinds of things. So working in corporate America, I contributed to a lot of different functions within the corporate realm.
That's great. And how long have you been involved in nonprofit world?
Well, I'd go back to when I was about 10 years old, actually, is when Dad hauled me to one of the first events that we did something. I've been much more significantly involved my entire life, of course, in taking on the projects that I wanted to take on. So really, 40 years I've been involved in nonprofits.
That's great. And what are you working on now?
So about 5 years ago, I started an organization called Chase the Music. And Chase the Music gives hope, strength, love, and joy to children battling critical conditions through the power of music. We do that by having an original song composed and then performed just for that child.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Chase the Music?
Yeah, so we do pieces for children battling critical conditions, and that can be for terminal diseases, severe injury, mental crisis, situational issues that occur in children. It's really when children are going through things that children shouldn't have to go through. Music is a real powerful tool to give them a real positive thing, a positive gift.
So each children has their own music?
So they get their own song, which is just amazing. We put a composer together with the child, and they get to meet with the child, the family, often the caregivers, and really get to know the child, and then they'll put those feelings to music. And it can be any kind of music. We say we do genres from A to Z, from Aboriginal to Zydeco. And funny thing is, we've actually done a didgeridoo piece, so we've got the A covered. We haven't done a Zydeco piece yet. But we've done jug bands, we've done rock, we've done jazz, we've done a number of classical pieces. It's just an amazing thing.
Oh, that's great. Can you tell me one story on how music made a difference for a child?
Yes. Let me talk about Katie. Katie's a young lady. She was about 13 years old when we were first introduced to her. And she's got a degenerative neural disease. And children with this disease generally don't make it into their 20s. So it's something that continues to degrade. And we had decided to do a piece with the Boulder Cello Project. And it was composed by a gentleman, Nick Halsey, out of Portland, Oregon. And I had met with Katie and her mom and her sister, and they were really excited about the project. Unfortunately, the dad was like, it's a beautiful day. Why are we going to spend our afternoon inside? We should be outside enjoying life. And he wasn't so sure what this whole thing was going to be about. At the end of the performance, he came up to me and said, Clark, this was better than our trip to Disneyland.
Oh my God.
And so at that point, I knew that we were having a big impact, not just on the children. About a year after that performance, I talked to Katie's mom, and she said when Katie's sad, she puts on her music, and it makes her happy again. And it's something that's a little different than other gifts that you might give a child with, a condition like Katie's got. It's something that is truly meaningful because we spend time to get to know the child, and the music is written just for them.
It's her dream, probably.
Yeah. And Katie's piece was called Katie's Run, and Katie loved to ski. And she was in the handicap program up at Winter Park, and she participated in the sit ski program. They had a special outrigger system for her because she really didn't like sitting. And so even though she couldn't walk without assistance, she was able to ski, which was just super amazing. And we surrounded Katie at her event with about 200 people that loved her. And going back to even her kindergarten teacher, who she hadn't seen in years, we were able to track her down and have her attend the event. So something
to
really
listen
special.
to her music?
To listen to her music performed and premiered live.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so really special, really special.
That's great. And the idea of the subject we are bringing today is really to be able to deliver more the mission of the organizations to the public that need. In this case was this child. And that's why we are discussing these ideas. And the baseline of the TED Talk we've been watching is that we really have to reset the mental model for the nonprofits to social good. And we're going to discuss a little bit about this. At the nonprofit executive lunch that we had another day, you said that you didn't want to be called a nonprofit. Can you explain me why not and what you prefer?
Yes. So nonprofit is my tax status. It's not the business that I'm in. I don't refer to Ford as a for-profit. They are a for-profit, but they're an automotive company. And that's how they're referred to. When we think about Ford, we think about automotive work. When we think about companies operating underneath the nonprofit status of the tax code, we shouldn't be thinking the most important thing about them is their tax status. The most important thing about that company is their mission. And we could generalize it to be social good. So I'm in the business of doing social good. I'm also in the business of doing music for children battling critical conditions, much like Ford is in the business of providing transportation services and providing automobiles to customers.
That's a great vision. I think every nonprofit should think like that. Any other examples of words that you wouldn't like to change?
Well, because of my nonprofit, I've got to experience a lot of children, and we use the word disability. A lot of these children, quote unquote, have a disability. Well, I'm a believer that of the 8 billion people on the planet, we all have a disability. It's just different. I can't play basketball. I'm not 7 foot tall. I'm also can't be a jockey. I'm way too much to be a jockey. And those are my disabilities. The children all have abilities too. And so I'd like to turn the focus around to the positive. And instead of disability, I'd like to talk about diffabilities, different abilities.
That's
because
great.
Everyone has abilities. There's a little boy here in town who could make anybody smile. And he has Down syndrome, and he is just the most wonderful human being, and you cannot smile when you're around this little boy. So that's his ability. Can he not do other things? Sure. He can't be a jockey, he can't be a basketball player. He's about the same size as me.
But he has a gift. Yes.
He's got a gift. He's got an ability. He has a diffability.
And I think we can transmit this as well for the employees, for the nonprofits. Everybody has their own ability and ability to innovate. And that's the idea of today's episode, is also to talk about how should we innovate in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell me a little bit about the fundraising event that Dan did and he explained at this amazing TED Talk? I was impressed with what he did.
Yeah, he really turned the world of fundraising upside down. And I'll be upfront, I don't know the numbers, but I'll give you example numbers. And he was running a bicycle race to support AIDS research in California. And at the time, the normal bicycle race would raise, say, $50,000 with expenses of $5,000 or $10,000. So an overhead rate of 10, maybe 20% to make that much money. And they'd walk away with $40,000. Well, that sounds pretty good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he got a little crazy, and somehow he got backing, and he spent $500,000 on promotions and T-shirts and making this a huge event. And he brought in $1 million. And people would say, wait a minute, 50% overhead for a fundraising event? That's way too much. But we're focused on the wrong thing. We shouldn't be focused on the overhead rate. We should focus on the fact that he brought in $500,000, more than 10 times what the traditional fundraising bicycle race would have brought in. He brought in $500,000 versus $40,000. The impact.
Yeah, breaking paradigms.
He broke a paradigm.
Yes. And I think we should bring this kind of mentality here. I've seen some EDs in Colorado doing that. I know the ED from Meals on Wheels Loveland did an amazing fundraising event in Old Town. He decided to close the main street of Old Town. It was really hard to get the liquor license, but he did it. And the second year was better and better. So we have to have the courage to start something new, in my opinion, don't you think?
I agree 100%. And I want us to focus on the impact of our social good organizations, not so much on the overhead rate.
So you talk a little bit about overhead, and I heard that a good number maximum would be 30% overhead. How can we attract talent people to nonprofits if they don't make enough money to live?
Well,
what is your opinion?
Yeah, there's two questions there. Is what should the overhead be, and how do we attract good people and make sure that they're adequately compensated? How do we pull them from a high-paying for-profit environment and pull them into a social good organization that maybe can't pay as well? So on the first note, we have to be really honest about how we look at overhead. And there's an extremely large New York City-based nonprofit that claims that every dollar goes to programs. Well, 0% overhead, how do you do that? You have to pay your bank fees, you have to pay your auditor, you have to pay your web host. There's so many things. You have to pay your people that are in overhead functions. How do they do that? Well, they're not totally transparent, but what they have is some donors that say, we'll cover the overhead, so that you can tell the donors that 100% of their money goes to the program. The reality is those people would give to the program if they didn't give to purely overhead. So to be totally transparent, you should look at the numbers of that organization and say, what's their overhead? I don't know what it is, because they tell me it's 100% programs, but I know different. I know that they've got to pay those people. So that's important. I think we should have some level of transparency that, yes, you have to have overhead to do a business. What should that overhead be? I can't say. 95% overhead sounds outrageous, sounds horrible, but for a nonprofit doing early research into something, that could easily be possible. And I wouldn't criticize them for that. I wouldn't tell them they don't have the right to do that, even though they don't have, significant amount of their programs going.
Yeah, I think if you bring talent people to the organization, probably you're going to have more income. With more income, you can deliver more. So you'll be able to retain those people. This is something that maybe the board members can start thinking about it, not just keeping the cost down, but bringing the best people ever to the organization. Maybe thinking in long term more than just short term. What this person can bring to the organization, how the organization can grow by bringing a person with open mind.
Yes, and Dan does talk about this in his TED Talk and in his books about how do we as social good organizations attract the best talent and keep them. Because face it, everybody's got to eat. Everybody needs a certain standard of living. And if they can't afford, if you're going to run a profit in New York City and you can't afford the rent, they're going to naturally migrate outside of that social good.
Yeah, and they go to the for-profit world, they make money, and then they become a donor. But that's not the intention. Maybe if you bring those brilliant brains before, you can make a huge difference and a huge impact in the world, for sure. Tell me about the puff chucking, or the views of doing good, one puffing at a time. I love this story.
So a few years ago, I heard the story about a little boy and his grandfather. And they were walking along the beach, and the little boy would pick up a starfish, and the tide was going out. So these starfish were doomed. They weren't going to survive. And he tossed the starfish back into the ocean. And as they continued to walk, the grandfather looked at him and says, you can't save all of them. The little boy walked a little further. He picked up another starfish and threw it in. He says, yes, but I just saved that one. I made all the difference to that starfish. And I always thought it was kind of cute because it was a story, but it didn't sound like it was real. Probably never happened. And then later on, I was reading about in Iceland, puffins, these little fat little birds. And they normally are attracted and directed by the moon. And the cities have been built up along the coastline, and now they come into the cities where they see all the lights. And they come in and they land in parking lots, they land in the street and in backyards, and they're confused and dazed. And they're doomed. They're not going to survive. And these are small, young puffins. And so the children started collecting puffins, and they'd put them in a cardboard box, and then they'd grab Dad and say, hey, Dad, we need to go to the sea. They'd drive over to the sea, and you take your puffin, and you take them one at a time out of the box, and you chuck it back to the sea. And the puffin will take off flying as he's reoriented himself back to nature. And so I kind of like that because it's the same story as the starfish. You can't change everything, but you can make all the difference to that one puffin.
And that's what you're doing with your organization, a difference with one child, for sure.
So we work with one child at a time, and we can't make a difference to all the children. We wish we could. We wish we could do a song for every person on the planet. That's what I would really love to see, is if we could have a song for every person on the planet. We prioritized on children battling critical conditions. And even with that, the numbers are so huge, we know we can't do all of them. But we can make all the difference to one child at a time.
That's great. And you also think that volunteers are misused by nonprofits. How so?
We start with the assumption that we need to operate. Let me start again. We start with the assumption that we have to minimize costs no matter what. And so we say if we can get free labor, that's the best for the mission, for the organization. It goes back to being focused on that overhead rate. And we lose good volunteers, we lose good people because they can't be compensated. People that need to work but really truly believe in our mission and would be effective working for our mission. So my personal belief is that our volunteers should all be paid, and if they don't need the money, be able to easily return it back to the organization. So that way people are getting paid what they're worth. We know what it costs then to run the business because we're actually putting real dollars on the volunteers and what those volunteer dollars or what those volunteer hours are worth. The IRS will let us put down a make-believe number, but it's a flat number, so it doesn't reflect the skilled labor of some of our volunteers. It's just a flat rate. So I'd rather see an honest accounting for what we do as a nonprofit and reward our volunteers. And if they so care to donate back, wonderful. And I think many of them would.
Yeah, I agree with you. And bringing this idea as well for advertising, maybe if the events organized by the nonprofits use the real media, the power of social media, advertising in good times, and how this can impact the organizations in your point of view.
The ideas of professional marketing are key for the nonprofits. And as Dan mentioned, the nonprofits often get discounted advertising at 4 a.m. when there is no market. And any good marketer would say, I really don't need that space, but as the poor me nonprofit will take anything that we can get for free. As opposed to if we really had developed our cost structures properly, we'd pay to be on the air at 6 o'clock in the evening at the prime rate when we can have the most impact. And that advertising can then have the biggest impact.
One example that Dan gives in his TED Talk, it's about long-term vision from Amazon. When they started their business, they asked their investors to wait at least 6 years to see the return on investment. And I see this long-term vision nowadays a little bit difficult. Back 20, 30 years ago, I think this was more present in the nonprofit world because people created a nonprofits and they were their own executive directors and they had their passion. But I've seen those EDs retire and looking for new executive directors to replace them. And the new people that are coming into the nonprofit world, they have more short-term vision, in my opinion, because they have plans for the next 3 to 5 years to change organizations. And how important is to still keep this long-term vision in a nonprofit, in your opinion?
It's critical. And we're in changing times where people don't stay in their jobs and their careers for their entire lives. It's much more common that someone will spend 3 to 5 years. And so how do we preserve the long-term vision and drive that forward, even though we know our staff's going to turn over multiple times in the near future? So the way I see us doing that is clear vision provided by the board of directors and the executive director on the long-term views of that organization. Are we trying to solve a problem that requires the organization be there for the long term? Is it addressing problems that are there permanently, or are they solvable problems? If you look at an example of Rotary was founded over 100 years ago with the intention of wiping out polio. And so that was their long-term vision. So now what do you do if you're Rotary and you've wiped out polio? Well, you've opened up and you do other social good programs. They don't have the same focus they had, but they give each of their local chapters a lot of leeway in doing good within their communities. So a long-term focus may start with a single problem, a single issue that can be resolved, but then you have to make the decision at that point when you've resolved that issue. Do you close up, or do you have a lot of good people and a lot of good momentum and a lot of good skills that you want to drive towards other good social good programs?
Yeah, and I think it's important what you said, that the board members have to be aware of the long-term vision, and the EDs that if they want to move forward their career to another organization, just be sure when they plan the short-term vision that the long-term vision is also present in their planning.
Mm-hmm.
And what of the government role in the nonprofits? What are your thoughts?
Frustration. So it starts in the very beginning as someone who wants to do social good considers nonprofit as an entity, a legal formation, and they will spend just in filing fees, I believe it's $800 now, to request to be a nonprofit. And then you'll wait anywhere from 30 days to 6 months, maybe more, to find out if the government has deemed you to be worthy to be a nonprofit. If I want to be a for-profit organization, at the federal level, it doesn't cost me a dime, and I can have my EIN number and all the federal authorizations to do business in less than 5 minutes. So why the difference? So the government shouldn't be working so hard not to allow nonprofits and dissuading good nonprofits from getting started. At the state level, we have the same problem. I believe it's 43 of the 50 states require nonprofits to register in their state to fundraise in that state. And then they also require not only registration, it's a paper registration, but also a financial registration. You have to pay to be doing business in that state. Plus, you have the burden of doing reporting every year, and the reports aren't standardized across the states. It would have been very simple for the states to say, provide the 990 form, and that's all you have to do if they so deemed necessary. The reality is, I think it's bureaucratic overhead. The states would claim, oh, we're protecting our citizens from bad nonprofits, but I think if we looked at those organizations, they probably haven't protected many of our citizens. And the overhead to those, especially smaller nonprofits, is significant.
Yeah, that's for sure the reason why they don't expand nationwide sometimes. They keep locally to reduce costs. Some numbers we saw at the presentation that I was really, really impressed was the charitable giving is stuck in 2% of the GDP in the past 40 years. That's about $300 billion a year. But only about 20% of that means $60 billion, goes to health and human service causes. And the rest goes to religion, higher education, and hospitals. The 60 billions that are not nearly enough to track these problems. But if we could move charity from 2% of GDP to 3%, we're going to make a huge difference. And I think the only way for us to talk about this new scale is really open our minds and doing different events, different fundraising, believing in new talents that we bring to our nonprofits. And we have to break this rule, in my opinion.
It all back us up to where we started. We need to change the mental model of these organizations being nonprofits and focused on the overhead rates of those organizations, and think of them as social good organizations and the impact that they can provide to our society. I think if we change that mental model, we change that mindset, we say, wait a minute, we're only given 2% for social good? Wow. You said 3%, I'll say, I don't know what the percentage is, but it should be significantly more than what it is today.
Yeah, we hope so. Let's work for that. And if the people listen to this podcast can help you somehow, can you tell them how to help your organization?
Well, first off, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. Chase the Music is always looking for a variety of things. We're looking for composers and musicians to create the music for the children. We partner with venues to have beautiful places to premiere the music for these kids. We love partnering with different organizations that bring us different facets of what we do. We partner with venues, children's organizations, universities, a wide variety of groups that can help us to meet our mission. On a bigger scale, what I'd like to see in the world is this change in our mental model, because that then benefits not only Chase the Music, but it benefits all of us in the social good. I hate to say it, but the nonprofit world. And I think as we change the mental model, we can move forward, we can move mountains.
I agree with you. That's why I want to be in this market of nonprofit for the rest of my life, as you do with your nonprofits. And if you have this inside of our hearts to make the good and make the difference, we're going to get there together, for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom for Nonprofits. To hear past and future episodes, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast channel. We appreciate your reviews and suggestions for future show topics. If you have a question or a suggestion, please write to us at podcast@wity.tech. More resources are available for you at our website, wity.tech. And please join us in the Wisdom for Nonprofits group on LinkedIn. Wisdom for Nonprofits is copyright 2019 by Bettina Meyer-Flug and wity.tech. All rights reserved.